Thank you for joining us at Midnight Affairs Tales. Today, your presence means the world to us. Tell us which corner of the globe are you watching from. We love knowing our global reach. Now let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Roman Castellano stood silently before the massive windows of his father's corner office, gazing out at the city below. From this height, Manhattan didn't look like chaos, it looked like strategy. Towering steel and flickering lights arranged like chess pieces, waiting for a move only he could make. At 34, Roman carried the sharp, angular grace of old Italian nobility, cut-glass cheekbones, intense dark eyes, and a presence that spoke of quiet command. But behind that was something colder, the honed discipline of American business, the kind his father had drilled into him like doctrine. The Castellano name meant something here. Not just wealth, power, influence, and fear. Vincent Castellano had built his empire from dust, one brick, one payoff, one silence at a time. A modest construction company had evolved into a vast web of legitimate businesses, each one hiding more profitable dealings that operated in society's blind spots. Construction, waste management, real estate, private security, it all connected. It all flowed upward. And now, it all belonged to Roman. He'd been groomed for this since he was old enough to read. While other kids were playing video games or throwing baseballs, Roman was learning to read a balance sheet, learning who to trust, who to ignore, and when silence was more powerful than any threat. While his classmates went to summer camp, he was shadowing department heads, studying under accountants and lawyers, listening at doors most men never got to knock on. His father had taught him that a king without knowledge was just a target, and Roman had never forgotten that. The call came at 3:47 a.m. on a cold Tuesday morning. Vincent Castellano, age 61, massive heart attack, dead in his study before the paramedics arrived. Roman had driven through the sleeping city with ice in his veins. Not grief, not panic, just clarity. There was no room for tears when you held the future of a criminal dynasty in your hands. His father's body was still warm when the calls started coming in. Bankers, lawyers, suppliers. Everyone wanted to know the same thing. Who's in charge now? The funeral was a performance masked as mourning. Roman stood at the grave, surrounded by perfectly tailored suits and cold, practiced condolences. Politicians spoke soft words while recalculating their alliances. Men with calloused hands and expensive watches offered firm handshakes, some respectful, some probing. And beside him stood Ava. She wore black like it was a brand name. One manicured hand rested lightly on his arm, her posture composed, almost delicate. But Roman felt the performance underneath. Her grip wasn't support. It was optics. Ava Morrison had arrived in his life 5 years ago like a polished diamond at a charity gala, sharp, beautiful, and dazzling under pressure. She'd studied psychology at Columbia, ran a fashionable art gallery in Soho, and navigated high society like she was born into it. Roman had been taken by her mind first, her poise second, and the way she never flinched at the darker edges of his life. Their whirlwind courtship felt like fate. But lately, he was starting to realize that fate was just a name people gave to very clever lies. The Castellano headquarters took up 12 floors of prime Manhattan real estate, polished marble, minimalist art, and bulletproof glass, all designed to look like any other high-end firm. It was anything but. Roman's first official day as CEO began at 8 a.m. sharp, seated at the long boardroom table with 12 faces watching him. Some were family. Some had been with his father for decades. All of them claimed to be loyal. That morning, he learned how many knew how to lie with a smile. Frank Torino, Vincent's oldest friend, and the company's CFO, handled the transition with mechanical grace. Contracts passed hands. Formal words were spoken. Roman signed documents and nodded as department heads presented quarterly numbers and operational briefings. He played the role, just as his father had taught him. But Frank's eyes told a different story. There was calculation there. And maybe pity. Lunch brought the first crack in the performance. Maria Santos, his father's long-trusted assistant, seemed off. She handed him the appointment ledger with slightly trembling fingers. When he asked if everything was all right, She barely made eye contact. Of course, Mr. Castellano. Just adjusting to the changes. But Roman had learned to read people the way others read headlines. Maria wasn't adjusting, she was afraid. By late afternoon, the signs multiplied. Conversations stopped when he walked into rooms. Phones clicked off too quickly. Familiar faces avoided his gaze. People he'd grown up seeing in boardrooms were suddenly strangers wearing masks he couldn't see through. By 5 p.m., Roman felt like a ghost haunting his own house. He stayed late, alone in the office that had been his father's and now is his. Without Vincent, the room felt colder, heavier, like a stage between acts. He crossed to the private safe his father had once shown him, using the code only the two of them had ever known. Inside, among folders and bundles of emergency cash, was a single envelope. For Roman's eyes only. He unfolded the handwritten letter. 3 pages in Vincent's unmistakable script, detailed notes, names, and timelines. Observations on loyalty. Warnings. The final paragraph struck like a blow to the ribs. If you're reading this, I'm gone. And you're in charge. Trust no one. Not completely. Not even family. Power reveals character. Succession reveals everyone's true intentions. Watch Ava. She's been asking too many questions about operations. A beautiful woman with expensive taste and divided loyalty is more dangerous than any enemy. Respect is earned. Fear is given. But betrayal is chosen. Choose your responses accordingly. V. Roman sat perfectly still, his pulse pounding even as his hands remained steady. Vincent had seen something coming. Something Roman had missed. And now his father's final lesson was scrawled across 3 pages like a warning from the grave. He folded the letter with surgical care and slid it back into the envelope. The elevator to the garage felt longer than usual. His BMW waited in its assigned space, polished and precise, but he didn't start the engine right away. He sat in silence, the city humming faintly outside. His father was gone. The vultures were circling, and the people closest to him might already have blood on their hands. The drive to the estate in Westchester took 45 minutes, cutting through layers of concrete and memory. 12 acres of manicured perfection greeted him. Glass, stone, and symmetry. Power disguised as peace. Ava's Porsche sat in the circular driveway, already home. He found her in the living room, lounging with effortless elegance, sipping white wine while scrolling her phone. Her expression lifted when she saw him. "Hey, how'd the first day go, big boss?" Her voice was soft, playful, affectionate. But now, Roman heard something behind the sweetness. A question beneath the tone. A fishing line cast with care. He smiled back. Measured. Cold. Watching her carefully. Her smile, warm, genuine, effortlessly disarming, might have worked once. It might have made him forget, even just for a moment, the weight pressing down on his shoulders. But now, Roman saw it differently. Now, he saw the performance in it. "How was your first day as the big boss?" she asked, her voice carrying the kind of playful affection that used to calm him. But beneath it, Roman heard something else. The tone was off by just enough to make him listen harder. Fishing, not caring. Productive, he said, lowering himself into the chair across from her. Getting a sense of things. Understanding current projects. Learning the rhythms. And, are you going to make changes? The question came quickly. Too quickly. Too focused. Roman didn't answer right away. He studied her face, the delicate tilt of her head, the stillness in her shoulders, the way her wine glass never moved even when she smiled. There was something too careful about it all. "Some adjustments are inevitable," he said slowly. "Why do you ask?" She laughed lightly, but it was a beat too forced. "Just curious about your plans. This is a big transition for both of us." Dinner was served on the terrace. Grilled salmon, a chilled bottle of wine, soft conversation over ambient lighting. They spoke about harmless things. The weather, weekend plans, some renovations she wanted to do on the guest house. It was exactly the kind of conversation that should have felt normal. Comforting. But Roman wasn't present in it, not truly. He was watching. Measuring. The way she paused before speaking, the way she smiled without her eyes. Vincent's letter had changed something in him. It was like adjusting a lens. Suddenly, what had seemed harmless before now bristled with new meaning. After dinner, Ava excused herself for a bath, claiming the day had been long and stressful. Roman nodded, kissed her forehead, and watched her leave without saying a word. Then he turned and walked into the study, not to look at numbers, but to think. He sat at his desk and stared at the glowing screen of his laptop, the cursor blinking back at him like a challenge. Vincent had warned him. Be wary of Ava. Watch her. She'd been asking too many questions. Now Roman played the conversations back in his head. 3 weeks ago, she'd asked about the company's private security contracts. 2 weeks ago, she'd mentioned the real estate holdings in Jersey. Last week, she'd brought up Frank Torino and his influence over daily operations. Back then, it all seemed like idle curiosity. A wife trying to understand her husband's world. Now it felt like reconnaissance. Roman's fingers moved with purpose as he began scanning email logs and internal correspondence. His access was unrestricted. Vincent had made sure of that before passing. His heir would have the keys to everything. Ava's email account wasn't empty. In fact, it was damning. Encrypted conversations. Discussions using vague code and secure messaging platforms. Words like contingency plans and timeline coordination leapt off the screen. The timestamps told a clear story. These weren't new. These had been going on for months. Months before Vincent died. Roman leaned back in his chair, the truth locking into place with quiet finality. She hadn't just been curious. She hadn't just been gathering information. She had been preparing. Preparing for his father's death. Preparing for the transfer of power. Preparing for a future where Roman was vulnerable. The house was still. The lights dimmed. The land surrounding them was quiet. No wind, no voices, no life. But Roman sat awake long into the night, alone in the darkness, mind spinning through implications. The woman he shared his life with, his bed, his home, his secrets, had been planning behind his back. Layer by layer, day by day. While smiling and playing the supportive spouse, she had been calculating. And Vincent had known. Roman closed the laptop and stared into the darkness. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore, it was loaded. He now understood his inheritance was more than buildings and accounts and contracts. He had inherited a kingdom, and that kingdom was infested with snakes. Tomorrow, new faces would smile at him with hidden teeth. New traps would be disguised as opportunities. And the only way forward was through fire. But tonight, as the shadows curled against the edges of his study and the weight of betrayal pressed down on his chest, Roman Castellano began laying the foundation for his response. Vincent had taught him that respect and fear were the twin pillars of power. And now, it was time to teach both. Roman arrived at the office before sunrise. The city hadn't fully awakened yet, just a few delivery trucks rumbling through the streets and a smattering of early commuters hurrying beneath street lamps. The lobby of Castellano Industries felt colder this morning. No longer the place he used to visit as Vincent's son. Now, it belonged to him. And with that came a different kind of silence, one heavy with expectation. The elevator ride to the executive floor gave him a few quiet minutes to collect himself. Maria Santos was already at her desk. A fresh cup of coffee steamed beside her, and her eyes widened slightly at the sight of Roman stepping out of the elevator so early. "Good morning, Mr. Castellano," she said, standing. "I wasn't expecting you until plans change," Roman interrupted. "I need personnel files. Everyone at the department head level. And anyone with access to sensitive operational information. I want everything on my desk in 30 minutes. Maria hesitated, only for a moment. But Roman noticed. "Of course, sir. Is there something specific you're looking for?" "Patterns," he replied, locking his gaze on her. "My father used to say the devil lives in the details." He didn't wait for a response. Vincent's office, now his, felt different today. Like a suit that had finally been tailored to fit. Roman had spent years sitting in this room, always on the visitor's side of the desk. But now, the weight of command settled around his shoulders like armor. The files began to tell a story. Frank Torino, CFO, family friend, supposedly loyal, had been requesting access to budgets well outside his role. Sandra Walsh, the head of HR, had been poking into executive insurance policies. David Chun, head of security, had been asking too many questions about legal protections and internal liabilities. Each inquiry alone could be dismissed. But together they painted a picture Roman couldn't ignore. People weren't just reacting to Vincent's death. They'd been preparing for it. Maria returned with coffee and a new stack of messages, her eyes scanning him nervously as she set them down. "Anything urgent?" he asked casually, glancing through the envelopes. "No, sir. Mostly standard updates. Your wife hasn't called yet. She usually calls first thing on big days. I just thought I should mention that won't be necessary," Roman said quietly. He didn't need her check-in. He didn't need her well wishes. Not anymore. Roman spent the next 2 hours combing through the company's internal structure with a clarity he hadn't felt before. On paper, Vincent had built a fortress, layered departments, isolated operations, no single person holding all the keys. It was a design born from experience, the kind of structure built by a man who had seen what power could do to loyalty. But Roman was seeing something else buried in the details. Certain employees had slowly, and very deliberately, expanded their access in recent months. People who had no reason to be involved in cross-departmental affairs now had visibility into multiple systems. Individually, their access seemed justifiable. Together, it looked like the foundation of a hostile takeover. Someone had been planning for Vincent's absence, and someone had been positioning allies to seize control. At exactly 10 a.m., a sharp knock interrupted Roman's concentration. Frank Torino stepped inside, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing the kind of expression reserved for bad news. Roman had seen it on his face before, during crisis meetings and delicate negotiations. But today, it came with something else: calculation. "Roman, we need to discuss some operational concerns," Frank said, settling into the chair across from him. His movements were careful, practiced, like a man trying to deliver poison with a sugar-coated spoon. "What kind of concerns?" "Some of the department heads are uneasy about the transition," Frank began. "It's not personal. Just, your father had a particular way of managing things. Certain aspects of the business require a delicate touch." "Meaning?" Frank shifted, offering a tight smile. "Meaning some operations demand oversight from people who understand their nuances. Long-standing relationships, legal gray zones, that sort of thing." Roman leaned back in his chair and studied him, really studied him. The man had been his father's friend for 30 years. He'd known Roman since he was a boy. And now here he was, offering advice disguised as an ultimatum. "Are you suggesting I'm not capable of running my own company?" "Not incapable," Frank replied quickly. "Just inexperienced in certain areas. It might be wise to leave sensitive operations under existing leadership while you settle in. Learn the ropes." The conversation continued for nearly 20 minutes. Frank outlined a transition plan that looked generous on the surface, but in practice, it stripped Roman of actual authority. The CEO title would be his, but the real control would sit elsewhere, in the hands of people already positioned. Roman gave nothing away. "I'll consider your recommendations," he said flatly. Frank seemed satisfied, nodded, and left without another word. The moment the door closed, Roman picked up the phone and called the one person he trusted to see through shadows: David Chun. The head of the company's private security division had a background in military intelligence. He was sharp, precise, and until recently, above suspicion. Roman hoped that still held true. When David answered, Roman didn't waste time. "I need background checks on several employees." Quietly, thoroughly, and with complete discretion. David didn't flinch. "Any particular reason?" "Call it due diligence. I want to know who's been stepping outside their lane." David paused for a moment. "Should I include family members?" That single question hung in the air like a loaded gun. Roman held his breath, then released it. "Include everyone." And David, this conversation never happened. "Understood." By noon, Roman was deep into restructuring plans when the unexpected arrived. Ava. She stepped into his office with the same practiced grace she wore at gala events, holding a takeout bag from his favorite Italian spot. She was dressed casually, but everything about her appearance was curated. Lip gloss perfect, hair carefully swept back, just enough perfume to feel familiar but not intrusive. "I figured you'd be too busy to eat," she said sweetly, setting the containers down with polished ease. Roman glanced at her, then the food. "Thoughtful of you." He watched her carefully as she moved. Small gestures, the subtle tension in her shoulders, the overly bright tone in her voice. "How was your morning?" she asked as she unpacked the food. "Productive," he said. "Meetings, paperwork. The usual." "You." Meeting with the new investor at the gallery. Then lunch with Diana. She dropped the name casually, her sister. But Roman didn't miss the buried message. Diana worked for a rival real estate firm. A competitor. Ava was never careless with her circles. Mentioning Diana now was intentional. They ate in silence for a few minutes. Comfortable on the surface. But underneath, Roman felt the war drum beat steadily in his chest. Then Ava dropped the second card. "Frank stopped by the house last night, after you went to sleep." Roman looked up, his face unreadable. "Did he?" He seemed concerned. About the transition. Apparently, some of the senior staff were worried. He mentioned that certain aspects of the business require very specific experience. Roman's fork paused midair. Her words were almost identical to Frank's. "Practiced. Rehearsed. And what do you think about these concerns?" he asked calmly. Her smile returned, soft and strategic. "I think you're incredibly capable, but maybe there's wisdom in easing into it. Your father built something powerful. Preserving that should be the priority." Roman nodded slowly as he finished his meal. She kept talking, light suggestions, smooth encouragements, ideas about a gradual transition that would let him ease into his role without disrupting anything too quickly. In other words, hand over control. Nicely. Cleanly. Quietly. "I appreciate your perspective," he said when she was done. "Family support means everything during times like this." Ava's face softened with relief. "I'm glad you see it that way. We're in this together, after all." When she left, Roman sat alone at his desk for a long time. Her words were echoes of Frank's. The same rhythm, the same message. They were coordinating, not just talking, plotting. At 4 p.m., David Chun returned with preliminary findings. Roman didn't stand. He just looked up, waiting. "Sir, the background checks revealed some interesting patterns," David began. "Several employees have been in regular contact with outside parties over the past 6 months. Financial records show deposits that don't match salaries. Phone logs show conversations with numbers flagged in prior surveillance reports." Roman's jaw tightened slightly. "How many?" "At least 12. All in positions of authority. Possibly more. It looks like a coordinated effort, and it's been going on for a while." "And family?" David hesitated. "Mrs. Castellano has been meeting regularly with Tony Marchetti." The name hit like a steel bat to the ribs. Tony, his cousin, Vincent's nephew, someone who'd been closer than a brother growing up. They'd shared childhood secrets, teenage dreams, and adult responsibilities. Roman had trusted him with more than just business. "How regularly?" he asked quietly. "Weekly, for at least 3 months. Always in private locations. Always in personal vehicles. Never anything traceable through company logs." Roman turned toward the window, staring down at the glowing grid of the city as the sun dropped lower in the sky. His wife, his cousin, the two people he trusted more than anyone, were planning his downfall. Planning his downfall while he was still mourning his father, while he was trying to honor Vincent's legacy. Roman didn't let the emotion rise. There was no space for it anymore. Not when clarity was finally cutting through the fog. "David," he said without turning away from the window, "I want full surveillance on everyone we just discussed. I want to know where they go, who they meet, what they say. All of it. Quietly. Nothing that compromises operational security." David gave a sharp nod. "Understood. Should I prepare contingencies in case things escalate?" Roman turned back toward him. "What kind of contingencies?" The former Marine didn't hesitate. "Physical security for you and your assets. Isolation protocols in case of breach. Neutralization strategies if it comes to that." Roman held his gaze for a long, silent moment. His father had always said business was war, only fought with suits and contracts instead of bullets and blood. But Roman was starting to see that sometimes war was exactly what it sounded like. Prepare the contingencies, he said coldly, but do not implement anything without my say-so. Yes, sir. By evening, Roman had made a decision he never thought he'd have to make. He called his attorney, not for business, for war. He ordered a full legal review of the company's structure, his marriage contract, and his father's estate. Every clause, every possible vulnerability. The pieces were sliding into place. Ava and Tony hadn't been reacting to Vincent's death. They'd been preparing for it. They'd quietly aligned allies, weakened key safeguards, positioned themselves to manipulate Roman's inexperience. Their timing had been perfect, during his grief, when his defenses were down and his instincts numbed. But they'd made one fatal miscalculation. They thought Roman would respond with emotion. They thought grief would make him weak. What they failed to understand, what Vincent had trained into him since he was a boy, was that Roman Castellano didn't panic. He recalculated. They never saw the predator beneath the polished air. As Roman stepped into the elevator and descended from the executive floor that night, something inside him had shifted permanently. He wasn't just inheriting a business. He was inheriting a battlefield. The enemy had already taken their positions, and they thought the crown was theirs for the taking. They were about to learn otherwise. The drive home took him through Queens, past corners where Vincent had first laid the foundations of power decades ago, bars that doubled as negotiation rooms, alleys that once taught hard lessons in loyalty. Roman stared out at those streets with a different perspective now. Everything Vincent ever taught him about strength, about control, about the cost of leadership, it all made sense now. Loyalty wasn't a gift. It was earned. Through power. Through precision. Tomorrow would bring new moves, new betrayals, new names. But tonight, Roman Castellano wasn't Vincent's grieving son anymore. He was a man who'd inherited a crown of thorns and had no intention of bleeding quietly. The next morning, Roman stepped into his office to find a neatly stacked pile of envelopes spread across his desk. 32 of them. Each one identical, heavy stock, formal letterhead, elegant formatting. Resignation letters. Maria Santos stood quietly in the doorway, her face pale, lips pressed tightly together. The guilt was written all over her. They were delivered at 7 a.m., she said quietly. All by courier. All at once. Roman didn't speak. He simply reached for the top letter and opened it. Frank Torino. Effective immediately. Respectful, professional, cold. The kind of language that dressed betrayal in silk. He opened another. Sandra Walsh. Head of HR. Difficult decision. Pursuing other opportunities. Then another. David Chun. Short. Direct. Effective immediately. Best wishes for your future endeavors. Roman moved through each envelope, one by one. Department heads. Senior managers. Trusted lieutenants. Family friends. All gone. All coordinated. They'd chosen this moment to strike, believing he'd be too shaken to respond. That this would cripple him. But Roman felt nothing except steel setting into his spine. His enemies had revealed themselves completely. No more pretending. No more masks. Maria hovered awkwardly near the door. Should I try to contact any of them? Maybe it's a misunderstanding. No misunderstanding. Roman cut her off, his voice razor sharp. They've made their position clear. He turned toward her, eyes unreadable. Cancel all my appointments. And get Ava on the phone. Tell her I need to see her. Now. Of course, sir. Ava arrived within half an hour. She wore a charcoal gray suit that made her look simultaneously professional and sympathetic. Her makeup was subtle but perfect. She entered the room with just the right amount of worry in her expression. Maria said something happened. What's going on? Roman gestured to the desk. The 32 resignation letters laid out like gravestones. These, he said, all delivered this morning. All citing concerns about my ability to lead. Ava's performance was immaculate. First came the shock, then concern, then righteous anger. That's outrageous, she said, moving closer. How dare they abandon you at a time like this? Roman's voice was steady, icy. Interesting choice of word. Abandon suggests they were ever truly with me to begin with. He watched her closely. Something flickered behind her eyes, just for a moment. The mask slipped. Not fear, not guilt. Strategy. Recalibration. What do you mean? She asked, voice softening. I mean, Roman said slowly, that this level of coordination doesn't happen overnight. This has been in motion for months. He leaned back, never taking his eyes off her. The question is, are you as surprised as you're pretending to be? Ava blinked. Then, like a switch, her posture softened again. Back into character. Roman, you're under a lot of stress. Maybe some of their concerns are valid. Your father had very personal relationships with many of them. People trusted him. Roman turned away, walking toward the window, letting the silence stretch between them like wire. My father also had very clear warnings, he said finally. About certain people. Ava's voice sharpened slightly. What kind of warnings? He turned back around, his tone harder now, no longer the son who needed support, but the man who had been forged under pressure. Do you remember our second date? He asked. You asked me what my father taught me about business. Ava frowned, caught off guard. Yes. You said something about discipline. I said the most important skill is knowing when someone is lying to you. He let that hang in the air between them. I've gotten very good at recognizing lies. I told you, Roman said, his voice even but razor-sharp, that the most important skill in leadership is recognizing when someone is lying to you. I remember, Ava replied cautiously. What does that have to do with? I'm very good at recognizing lies now. He turned to face her directly, his eyes locked onto hers. And I've been lied to. Extensively. By people I trusted completely. The silence between them stretched like drawn wire. Ava didn't blink, but Roman could see it, her brain scanning for options, recalculating strategies, measuring escape routes. If you have something to say, she finally said, her voice tight, just say it. Roman smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. It was a hunter's grin, cold, sharp, and final. I'm saying that everyone who resigned today made the same mistake. They thought I'd crumble, that I'd panic, that I'd come crawling back, begging them to reconsider. Ava's tone faltered. And you won't. I don't negotiate with traitors. The word landed like a gunshot. Ava's facade cracked. Her posture shifted. Her carefully measured empathy vanished, revealing the calculating intelligence that had always been beneath the surface. This was no longer a performance. This was war. Roman, she said, dropping the act, you're making a mistake. These people aren't your enemies. They're trying to protect what your father spent a lifetime building. Maybe you should stop assuming there's a conspiracy where there isn't one. Roman didn't respond to her deflection. He stepped around the desk and asked plainly, Where's Tony? What? Ava blinked. My cousin. Where is he this morning? How would I know? Roman reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a folder. He dropped it on the table, flipping it open to reveal a stack of photographs. Surveillance stills. Ava and Tony, meeting in restaurants, parking lots, private cafes. Different dates, different times. All documented, all undeniable. Ava stared at the images. Her face went blank. No more fake outrage, no more charm. Just silence. How long have you known? She asked finally. Does it matter? Roman asked, spreading the photos across the desk like playing cards. The question is, are you going to keep lying? Or are you ready to start explaining? Ava slowly sank into the chair opposite him. The act was gone. This was the real her now, sharp, unapologetic, and deadly. Your father was 71, Roman, she began, voice calm, cold. He hadn't truly run this company in years. Tony's been handling the operational side quietly, but effectively for a long time. You thought he should inherit instead of me, Roman said flatly. I thought the business should be led by someone who actually understood how it works. Her voice wasn't angry, it was matter of fact. Like explaining a math problem. You know the surface-level operations. The clean side. But the Castellano empire is more than front-facing revenue. You were shielded from the real business. Roman's expression didn't shift. So you and Tony staged a coup. We prevented a collapse, Ava corrected. There are things inside this company that could destroy you if you handle them wrong. Tony knows how to manage those relationships. You don't yet. Roman's eyes narrowed. Yet. Ava paused. The word had slipped. What do you mean by that? She asked cautiously. I mean education can be gained. Relationships rebuilt. Trust earned. His smile now held the gleam of shattered glass. But betrayal? He said. Betrayal is permanent. Ava stood, visibly shaken now. If you push this, Roman, we'll walk. All of us. The people who actually keep this empire functioning. You'll be left with empty desks, lawsuits, and enemies who don't play by the rules. Roman didn't hesitate. Perfect. Ava blinked. What? I said perfect, he repeated, rising to his full height. Because now I know exactly who my enemies are. What they're planning. How they position themselves. You just gave me the clearest list I could have hoped for. Ava stepped back toward the door, suddenly realizing the depth of the miscalculation. Roman, you don't understand. These people have leverage. Secrets. If they turn on you, they already have, he said sharply. She tried again. You don't know what you're walking into. He stepped closer, voice lowering like a storm about to break. Do you really think Vincent Castellano's son doesn't know how to deal with dangerous people holding dangerous information? You're making a mistake, she whispered. The only mistake I made, Roman said, was trusting anyone who was already planning my execution. He walked slowly around the desk, advancing as she reached for the handle. That's a mistake I won't make again. She opened the door with shaking hands. This isn't over, she snapped. You can't run this company alone. Roman's voice was like a hammer. I won't be alone. I'll be surrounded by people who know that betrayal comes with consequences. And what about us? Her voice cracked. What about our marriage? Roman stared at her as if she were a ghost. That ended the moment you started plotting with Tony. Everything since has been theater. Ava left without another word, her heels echoing across the marble floor like the final ticks of a countdown. Roman turned back to the window. The skyline hadn't changed, but everything beneath it had. His enemies had chosen to strike all at once, believing the weight of betrayal would crush him. Instead, they had freed him. No more diplomacy. No more masks. No more debts. He sat back down and started making calls. Not to the traitors. To the loyalists, those who had once served his father in silence. Accountants. Investigators. Private security. Fixers. People who didn't operate in daylight but moved with purpose in the dark. By noon, Roman had activated a network built over 3 decades by Vincent Castellano. Men and women who knew that loyalty wasn't a feeling, it was a weapon. And now, it was his. Maria returned as afternoon shadows began to stretch across the office. She stood silently at the threshold, awaiting instruction. Prepare termination paperwork for the resignations? She asked softly. Roman looked up. His voice was clear and controlled. No need, he said. They've already terminated themselves. He turned back to his desk, reviewing the notes he'd been compiling, names, accounts, timelines. But one thing remained clear. I need new contracts, he added. For replacements. We rebuild now. With people who know what loyalty looks like. And the sensitive aspects? Maria asked carefully. Roman's smile returned, cold and unforgiving. Those will be handled, he said, by people who understand that some lessons are only learned once. The resignation symphony was over. Now came the overture to war. It was time for Roman Castellano to orchestrate a new kind of symphony, one that would silence traitors and teach them what happened when grief was mistaken for weakness. For the next week, Roman walked the halls of the nearly empty tower like a detective at a crime scene. With the senior staff gone, doors that had long been closed were now wide open, both literally and metaphorically. He had full access to offices, files, and systems that had once been firewalled behind departmental silos. What he uncovered painted a picture more damning than he had ever imagined. Frank Torino's office yielded the first bombshell. Inside a locked filing cabinet, one Vincent had shown Roman how to open years ago, were financial projections not for the company as it stood, but for the future Castellano empire under Tony Marchetti's leadership. The projections included revenue streams Roman had never heard of, clients he'd never met, and procedures that went far beyond construction or real estate. Vincent Castellano's empire hadn't just operated in gray areas. It was the gray, private security that occasionally acted more like enforcers, waste management that quietly handled more than garbage, real estate deals backed by intimidation and manipulation. It was a hidden infrastructure supporting the underside of power across 3 states. Vincent had built a machine that ran behind the curtain of polite society, and Roman had been shielded from all of it. Until now. Sandra Walsh's computer told a similar story. Email trails showed she'd been working with recruiters to staff up with Tony's people months before Vincent's death. It hadn't been spontaneous. It had been staged with surgical precision. David Chin's internal security files included logs tracking Roman's every move, his meetings, habits, relationships. Every vulnerability documented and cataloged. His own father's allies had been watching him like a liability. But the final dagger came from Ava. In her hurry to leave, she'd forgotten her designer handbag. Inside was a burner phone, cheap, untraceable. But its contents were devastating. Encrypted messages between her and Tony told the full story. Roman suspects something. We may need to accelerate the timeline. Ava, 2 days after Vincent's funeral. Frank is nervous about the financial transition. Reassure him his role is safe under new leadership. Tony, a few days ago. Once the resignations hit, we'll have 48 hours to consolidate control before he can respond. Ava, yesterday morning. Roman read through the exchanges in silence, sitting in his father's old chair with a stillness that masked the storm inside him. They had mapped it all out. The death, the takeover, the insulation of power. But they'd made one mistake. They underestimated the man Vincent had raised. His education hadn't been complete when Vincent died. Roman had been taught how to handle the public-facing empire, financial strategy, leadership, legal boundaries. But the inner circle, the darker gears of the machine, had been kept from him, not out of mistrust, but because Vincent had believed there would be more time. But now, Roman was learning fast, and his enemies had handed him a masterclass syllabus, complete with names, tactics, and timelines. He spent 3 days reviewing everything. Every contract, every deal, every black file. There were clients whose consulting fees to the Castellano Group bought more than advice. There were judges who owed favors, public officials with skeletons Vincent had helped bury, unions that had backed off after midnight visits. The scope of power wasn't in the ledgers. It was in the favors owed and the fear maintained. By Thursday, Roman didn't just understand what his father had built. He understood how to take it back. By Friday, he was ready to make his first move. His call went to Albert Morrison, a name that appeared again and again in Vincent's encrypted ledgers. A fixer, a power broker, a ghost who never appeared in press clippings, but whose fingerprints were on half the deals in the city. Morrison answered after 2 rings. Roman Castellano. I've been waiting for your call. Roman didn't waste time. We need to discuss business arrangements that were interrupted by certain resignations. I heard. Unfortunate timing. Morrison said, calm and knowing. Some matters required delicate handling. Perhaps we meet in person? Roman agreed. They met that evening at a private restaurant in Midtown, one that Vincent had frequented often. The staff didn't blink when Morrison took the private booth in the back corner, a position with a perfect view of every entrance and exit. This wasn't dinner. It was a test. Albert Morrison was in his 70s, but he carried the gravitas of a general. His suit was subtle but custom, his cufflinks engraved with initials that weren't his. Power. Quiet, old, and sharp. We worked together for 25 years, Morrison began without small talk. Your father solved problems for people who couldn't solve them through polite channels. The question is, do you understand what that really means? I'm learning, Roman said evenly. Learning, Morrison repeated, unimpressed. Not enough. This world doesn't forgive half-knowledge. It devours hesitation. Understanding is required. But commitment? That's everything. Roman met his gaze without blinking. My father's death was followed by a planned coup, coordinated to strip me of the empire he built. They assumed I'd crumble. I'm here to prove them wrong." Morrison smiled. The first genuine one Roman had seen in days. Good. Because the alternative is working with Tony Marchetti. And that boy confuses ambition with competence. Over the next 2 hours, Morrison laid out the network Vincent had cultivated over decades. Judges who had once called Vincent before issuing rulings. Politicians whose campaigns had been corrected with late-night donations and timely leaks. Business leaders who turned to Castellano not when things went wrong, but when things got dangerous. Your father didn't leave records. He didn't make threats. He didn't raise his voice. He provided results. The kind that can't be found in contracts. Roman asked, "What kind of problems?" Morrison leaned in. The kind that end without trials. The kind that leave no paper trail. The kind that keep empires from crumbling because someone knows how to take out a loose brick quietly. Your father didn't just build power. He managed fear. He was the difference between collapse and continuity. Roman listened. Every word was a tool, every name a blade. This wasn't just a crash course. It was a coronation. Careers. Reputations. Even freedom. Destroyed with one wrong move if not handled correctly. Morrison's voice lost its usual calm, replaced by something harder, colder. "Roman, are you prepared to inherit that level of responsibility?" Roman thought of Ava's betrayal, of Tony's quiet coup, of 32 resignations delivered in synchronized precision to break him. He thought of every room he had walked through with a smile kept outside the inner circles, unaware of the shadows shifting behind him. Of his father's trust, given too late, but finally, fully. "I'm prepared to inherit everything my father built," he said. "And I'm prepared to use it." Morrison nodded. "Then we need to talk about your immediate problems." Tony has been reaching out to mutual contacts. He's spinning a story that the transition wasn't smooth, that he's the more capable alternative. "And what do you think of his position?" Roman asked. Morrison's laugh was dry as bone. "I think Tony Marchetti is an ambitious child who's never understood that this business is built on trust, not intimidation. He believes relationships can be bullied into obedience. He's already made mistakes that'll cost him dearly." Roman felt it. The pattern forming. The leverage revealing itself. What kind of mistakes? The kind made by amateurs pretending they understand fire while standing in gasoline, Morrison said. Tony's been promising continuity, but he doesn't even understand how things were handled. He stepped into sensitive territory without understanding the weight behind it. Over the next hour, Morrison painted a picture of chaos. A federal judge, once protected discreetly by Vincent, was now being pressured by Tony to deliver rulings that would collapse both of their careers. A city councilman, who had once quietly received help after a DUI, was now being forced to fast-track contracts he couldn't legally justify. A construction magnate, whose union headaches had been smoothed over with behind-the-scenes diplomacy, was being cornered by threats and unreasonable demands. "Tony thinks fear is the only tool," Morrison said. "He never learned what Vincent knew. Real power comes from being indispensable, not dangerous." "And now?" Roman asked. "Now those clients are getting nervous. Desperate. And when desperate people panic, they make reckless decisions. They'll protect themselves, and in doing so, expose everyone." Roman understood. This wasn't just an inheritance. It was a live wire. If someone doesn't intervene, Morrison said, Tony's going to create a crisis that could burn down everything your father built. Roman leaned forward. "What kind of intervention?" "The kind that reminds people why Vincent Castellano's son is someone they can trust, and someone they should fear if they cross." Morrison slid a thick folder across the table. Inside were names, leverage points, pressure valves, histories, clients, favors, weaknesses, debts. Your father always said information is the most valuable currency. He used it carefully, never for revenge, always for message. Roman closed the folder. "And what about consequences?" Morrison smiled like a man unsheathing a blade. "Consequences are what make the next traitor think twice." When Roman walked out of that restaurant, he carried more than a playbook. He carried the permission to fight. His enemies believed stripping the executive branch would leave him powerless. Instead, they'd cleared his path to the real boardroom. Now Roman had direct access to the levers of power his father had once controlled. Tony was bluffing with a loaded weapon he didn't know how to fire. Ava was negotiating with ghosts. And Frank? Frank had numbers, but no idea what those numbers were hiding. Roman drove through the old neighborhoods, streets where his father had taught him not just how to make money, but how to make moves. There were no framed degrees or golden statues in Vincent's world. Respect wasn't inherited. It was earned. Tomorrow, Roman would begin earning his. But tonight, the sheltered air was gone. The hunter was awake, and he was ready to reverse the roles. Monday morning tested him immediately. A call came through a private line Morrison had provided, a line used only in the highest circles of his father's silent empire. Roman Castellano? I'm listening. This is Judge Harrison Blackwell. I need to speak to someone who actually understands the delicacy of certain matters. Things are unraveling. Roman remembered the judge's file. Vincent had once helped the man disappear a gambling debt that could have torched his reputation and had, in turn, received favorable scheduling and procedural leniency in key family cases. The relationship was quiet, balanced, mutual benefit without pressure. But Tony had stepped in like a wrecking ball. The person you've been dealing with, Blackwell said, he doesn't grasp the nuances. He's demanding dismissals, suppression of evidence, outright interference. Your father never put me in this kind of position. Roman listened, took notes. Tony's arrogance had weaponized the very relationships Vincent had spent decades protecting. Your Honor, Roman said, voice calm. I apologize for any pressure you've felt. That will end today. Blackwell exhaled. That's what I wanted to hear. Because if this continues, I'll have no choice but to protect myself. And if I do that, he didn't need to finish the sentence. I'll make it right, Roman promised. Give me a day. He hung up and looked out the window at the skyline. Tony had built a fire. Roman Castellano was bringing the water and the gasoline. You've received that message loud and clear, Your Honor, Roman said firmly. Because that approach, Tony's approach, doesn't reflect our organization's values or strategic thinking. There was a pause. Then Judge Blackwell exhaled into the phone. Then you'll call off your cousin? I'll handle the situation personally. And from now on, any request for assistance will be thoughtful, legal adjacent, not reckless. You have my word. The relief in the judge's voice was unmistakable. Your father was a man who thought in decades. I hope you've inherited that view. Roman hung up, only for his phone to light up again moments later, this time with the name Councilman Paul Hendricks flashing across the screen. Tony had been leaning on him too, pushing contracts through city zoning boards that violated multiple codes and regulations. That kid doesn't get it, Hendricks muttered. Some favors cost more than they're worth. Vincent understood that. Influence has limits. Exposure doesn't. Roman listened carefully. By noon, he'd received 6 more calls just like it. Each from someone Vincent had quietly helped, each now under pressure from Tony's blunt force tactics. The pattern was clear. Tony wasn't just alienating allies. He was setting off alarm bells. He's acting like a mob enforcer, Morrison said when Roman called him back. Vincent was a surgeon. Tony's using a sledgehammer, and sledgehammers leave evidence. How long do we have before the feds start asking questions? They're already watching, Morrison said flatly. Tony's made enough noise to draw a pattern. All it takes now is one whistleblower. Roman felt the shift. The very power base Tony was trying to claim, judges, councilmen, back-channel fixers, was recoiling. And if Roman played this right, they'd turn to him instead. I need to meet them all, Roman said. Face to face. I need them to know I'm the long-term solution. Not him. Dangerous territory, Morrison warned. You just took control. If people see you with judges and councilmen, you could trigger suspicion. Not if it's social. Not business. Charity events, fundraisers, places Vincent always used for subtle messaging. There was a pause. Then, a quiet chuckle from Morrison. You were your father's son. There's a pediatric cancer fundraiser Thursday night. Plaza Hotel. Half the council will be there. 3 judges. 2 senators. Roman spent the next 3 days preparing. Morrison handed him intelligence files, detailed reports on each target, who they were, what they valued, how they liked to be approached, and what made them feel secure. Roman read every page like gospel. And when Thursday came, he walked into the plaza dressed not just for the fundraiser, but for war. The room glowed with champagne and tuxedos. 500 guests, politicians, CEOs, socialites, all gathered under the banner of pediatric cancer research. Roman arrived late, just like his father used to, scanning the crowd with quiet precision. His first stop, Judge Blackwell. The man stood near the silent auction table with his wife, reviewing a vacation package to the Hamptons. Roman casually placed a bid on a nearby package, close enough to strike up conversation, far enough to keep it public. Beautiful evening for a good cause, Roman offered with a neutral smile. Indeed, Blackwell replied, glancing sideways. Your father never missed this event. He taught me that supporting the community earns you more than goodwill. It builds real connection. The judge gave a small nod. 5 minutes later, the conversation ended just as smoothly, but Roman saw it. The judge's body language had shifted. Relaxed. Reassured. Roman repeated this dance with Councilman Hendricks, then State Senator Patricia Walsh, then 3 more key allies. All brief, all respectful, all designed to send one clear message. Vincent Castellano's son was not a boy trying to fill a suit. He was a man who understood how the game was played. But the night's most unexpected encounter came outside the ballroom, near the restrooms, where Roman nearly collided with Detective Lieutenant Maria Santos, his assistant's sister, and more importantly, a name that had appeared in Vincent's private files again and again, without context. Now he understood. Mr. Castellano, she said, recognizing him instantly. I heard about the leadership transition. I didn't know you knew my family's business. Santos studied him carefully, eyes sharp as a scalpel. Your father and I had conversations about stability, community, quiet courtesies between people who understood the value of order. Roman felt the pieces shift into place. Vincent hadn't just built political ties. He built protection in law enforcement. And Maria Santos was more than a detective. She'd been a pressure valve, a warning light, an ally. I hope those conversations can continue under new management, Roman said evenly. That depends, she replied, on whether new management understands the difference between strength and intimidation. The warning was clear. Tony's making noise, she said, her tone calm but serious. And noise draws attention. When federal eyes start watching, everyone near the blast zone becomes a suspect. Even the ones just trying to clean up. Roman nodded. Detective, I believe in the same balance my father did. Quiet strength. Stability. Win-win relationships. Good, she said. Because when instability reaches a certain point, we step in. And we don't always ask nicely. Roman thanked her. It wasn't just a warning, it was an invitation. A chance to get it right. He left the fundraiser with full awareness of the moment he stood in. His cousin's recklessness had opened the door. But that door wouldn't stay open forever. Tony was setting the house on fire. Roman just had to make sure he was the only one left holding the matches. The balance Vincent had spent decades perfecting now rested in Roman's hands. And for the first time, Roman understood why his father had been so insistent on patience, control, and long-term thinking. This wasn't just about restoring the Castellano legacy. It was about earning it, step by calculated step. Tomorrow, the campaign would escalate. Roman would begin turning Tony's nervous allies into his own. Not with threats, not with panic, but with precision, with evidence, with loyalty's currency, results. The web was unraveling. But Roman was about to make sure his enemies were still caught inside when it collapsed. The Predator's patience Tuesday night. Sleep didn't come. Roman sat alone, surrounded by old surveillance logs David Chun had handed him before his departure. Of all the betrayals, Chun stung most. Roman had respected his military discipline, his composure, his code. But that was the lesson, wasn't it? Sometimes betrayal came dressed in the sharpest uniforms. The surveillance told him everything. Tony was running operations from a warehouse in Queens. It looked like a fortress on the outside, guarded, active, but it was chaos beneath the surface. Meetings were erratic. Clients looked anxious. Conversations turned aggressive. The men surrounding Tony weren't loyal. They were rented. Paid muscle with no history and no future, just inflated salaries to buy silence. But those salaries were bleeding Tony dry. And the worst part? Tony wasn't just operating in the shadows, he was using company accounts to do it. Accounts Vincent had once protected like lifelines. And now, Roman had the power to pull the plug. He made the call Wednesday morning. "Frank," Roman said, voice steady, "we need to talk about some irregularities." On the other end, Frank Torino, once Vincent's financial gatekeeper, sounded drained. He knew exactly what Roman had found. What kind of irregularities? Unauthorized withdrawals. Unapproved transfers. Activity that could trigger federal audits. A long pause. "Roman, perhaps we should meet." "I don't think so." Roman's voice chilled. "I think you should ask yourself whether continuing to fund Tony's operation is worth risking prison." There was another pause, this one heavier. "The accounts will be secured immediately," Frank said. "Good. And Frank, my father believed that loyalty wasn't measured by words, but by actions. I hope you'll remember that in the days ahead." Roman hung up and called Morrison. "Tony just lost access to his money," he said. "How long before that starts causing damage?" "Days," Morrison replied. "Not weeks. He's been overpaying to hold things together. That glue's about to dry up. And when it does, he'll get desperate. And when desperate men go hunting for funding, they make mistakes." Roman nodded slowly. "Set up a meeting. Someone high profile. Someone who's felt Tony's recklessness. Judge Blackwell." "Perfect." They met Friday night at Morrison's private club. Discreet. Elegant. A place where the napkins were silk and the real conversations happened in whispers. Blackwell arrived on time. No entourage. No pretense. Just a nervous man clinging to the last edge of control. "I'll be direct," the judge said, seating himself. "Your cousin's behavior is threatening more than his reputation. If this doesn't stop, I'll have to publicly distance myself from your family." Roman had prepared for this. Studied Blackwell's file. Knew what mattered most. "My father never used people, Judge. He partnered with them. He believed in mutual protection, not pressure." "I do too." Blackwell watched him closely. "And Tony." Roman slid a thin folder across the table. "This is your gambling history. The debts that nearly destroyed you years ago? They're gone. Wiped? Not just paid off, erased." Blackwell blinked, surprised. "My father never told you," Roman continued, "because power comes from solving problems, not holding them hostage. He didn't collect judges. He built community stability." The judge opened the folder. Silence settled as he read. Then, relief. Genuine, not strategic. "And Tony's demands?" "What demands?" Roman said, his voice sharpening. "You owe this family nothing. What you owe, if anything, is what one community leader gives to another. Professional respect." Blackwell closed the folder. His tone softened. "Your father's son, indeed." Roman gave a small nod. But his tone didn't soften. "That being said, I do expect something in return. Not favors. Not decisions. Just clarity. I want Tony's future clients to hear exactly how he operates. The pressure. The recklessness. I want them to understand the difference." Blackwell's eyes gleamed with understanding. "You want me to talk?" Roman smiled. "I want you to tell the truth. Loudly. Carefully. Publicly. Enough for the right ears." The judge stood. "I think we can agree on that." When Blackwell left the room, Roman turned to Morrison. "One down." Morrison chuckled. "That was the easy one." "I'm counting on it," Roman said. "Because the next step is Tony himself." Tony's recklessness had finally detonated the trap Roman had spent weeks laying. And now, it was time to tighten the noose. Roman looked across the polished table at Judge Blackwell, laying down a second folder. Inside, clean, irrefutable evidence. Tony's aggressive tactics weren't just unethical, they were illegal. Documented financial coercion. Covert threats. Bank withdrawals made under false pretense. Language so precise it might as well have been written for a prosecutor's opening statement. Blackwell flipped through the pages slowly. This, is enough to launch a RICO investigation, he muttered. Not just Tony. This would pull in everyone. Roman didn't blink. Unless it's targeted. The judge looked up, eyes narrowing. If investigators are guided to focus specifically on Tony, his direct actions, his forged approvals, his unsanctioned demands, we can protect the broader structure my father built. The people who've honored the rules. A long pause. You're asking me to manage a federal investigation. I'm asking you to preserve the integrity of what's still functional, Roman said, and to help remove the infection before it spreads. Blackwell leaned back, the weight of the moment sinking in. I've heard Detective Santos is already expressing concern. She is, Roman nodded, and I trust she wants stability. If you coordinate quietly, we can remove Tony without implicating those who never participated in his decisions. Blackwell closed the folder and exhaled. What's your timeline? Tony's liquidity dried up this morning. His panic will create mistakes. Within days, he'll give us what we need. When that happens, we act surgically. Roman's tone was calm, but his words cut with the precision of a scalpel. I don't want a bloodbath. I want a lesson that echoes for decades. The judge gave a slow nod. Your father would approve. They spent the next hour finalizing the structure of cooperation, protective protocols, specific language for testimonies, a firewall around the legitimate operations Vincent had spent a lifetime crafting. By the time Blackwell left, Roman wasn't just orchestrating a removal. He was scripting history. The following morning, Roman's phone rang. A familiar voice on the line, Ava's divorce attorney. Mr. Castellano, my client is open to discussing equitable division of marital assets. She's open to negotiating surrender terms, you mean? The silence that followed was almost amused. Then, carefully, I think there may be some miscommunication regarding the circumstances of your separation. No, Roman interrupted coldly. Your client conspired to defraud my family's business. She's entitled to whatever assets she brought into the marriage. Nothing more. In New York, equitable distribution laws still, my wife is entitled to whatever a federal judge deems appropriate, Roman snapped. After reviewing evidence of wire fraud, collusion, and abuse of spousal privilege, he paused just long enough to let the words settle like lead. She's welcome to explain her role in the conspiracy under oath. The line went quiet. Then the attorney ended the call without another word. Hours later, Roman received a single text from Ava. We need to talk. His reply was instant. No, we don't. By Sunday night, every piece had fallen into place. Tony's funding had collapsed. Federal investigators were watching him closely. Judge Blackwell had agreed to manage the legal boundaries of the storm. And Ava? She was boxed in, unable to claim $1 without risking indictment. But this wasn't victory yet. This was preparation. The final stage required not just defense, but offense. Tony was desperate now, and desperation made men dangerous. Roman knew that well. So he spent the night in Vincent's study, revisiting his father's handwritten notes. The lessons weren't academic anymore. They were weapons. Tomorrow, the strike would begin. The first strike Monday morning, the call came at 8 a.m. sharp. Detective Lieutenant Maria Santos. Mr. Castellano, she said, voice crisp and unmistakably recorded, your cousin made some very poor decisions over the weekend. Roman didn't flinch. How unfortunate for him. He attempted to access a protected business account. Federal banking systems flagged it. Investigators are involved now. Roman leaned back, letting her words confirm what he already knew. Federal investigations have a tendency to grow, Santos added. Community leaders who cooperate transparently avoid complications. Roman nodded slowly. Cooperation with law enforcement has always been our family's policy. Good to hear. There may be opportunities to demonstrate that policy in the coming days. The call ended cleanly, just like Roman expected. Santos was covering herself, but she was also giving him the clearest signal possible. The government was officially watching Tony now. Minutes later, Albert Morrison called. It's moving faster than we thought, he said. FBI opened a financial crimes file this morning. Tony's account breach triggered more than just an alert. They're asking questions. What questions? They want to know who else had access. Who authorized it? Who knew? Roman's answer was measured. They'll discover that Anthony Marchetti acted alone, using stolen credentials, making false claims about his authority. Nothing more. Good, Morrison said, because he just threw a match into a room full of fuel. Roman's gaze drifted to the skyline. I'm about to make sure he burns alone. His desperation led him to break every safeguard, every code, every rule he once pretended to understand. And now, Roman had simply handed the consequences to those best equipped to deliver them. Ava stood frozen in front of his desk, the mask slipping from her face. You planned all this, she whispered. You've been preparing it since the day your father died. Roman's expression didn't change. I've been responding to betrayal. Preparing would have required believing it was coming. A long pause. I told you, she said quietly, I married you because I believed in your future. No, Roman replied. You married me because you thought I was controllable. Just like Tony. Just like everyone else you surrounded yourself with. Her shoulders stiffened, but the panic was spreading in her eyes now. Not just fear of exposure, but fear of irrelevance. Tony won't go down quietly, she warned. He'll talk. He'll say things that'll implicate the entire family, including you. Roman stood slowly, calm, cold, certain. I'm not the one who transferred illegal funds. I'm not the one who held secret meetings in parking garages. And I'm definitely not the one who sent burner phone messages outlining a coup. Ava stepped back. I did what I had to do. Your father, he never trusted me. You were never supposed to inherit the real business. And yet, Roman said, walking around the desk, here I am, running it, cleaning it, making sure that what my father built survives the two of you. Her voice cracked. You'll regret this. No, he said, opening the door behind her. You will. Ava's jaw tightened, but she didn't speak again. She turned, heels clicking against the floor as she walked out, not with power, not with control, but with the silence of someone who just realized her position was over. Hours later, Roman sat across from Special Agent Catherine Williams at Morrison's law office. This wasn't a confrontation. It was a presentation. I want to be clear, Roman said. I didn't come here to deny anything. I came to provide everything you need to separate the criminal behavior from the legitimate operations my father spent decades building. Agent Williams was sharp, experienced, but even she looked impressed by the thick folder Roman handed her, time-stamped emails, wire transfers, falsified documents, burner phone logs, and a clear paper trail that mapped Tony's financial abuse to the day Vincent died. Roman didn't fumble, didn't stall. For every question, he had a direct answer. Timelines, authorizations, procedural protocols, cross-referenced evidence. This level of preparation suggests you've been investigating for some time, Williams noted. I started the moment I found something off in our ledgers, Roman said. What I discovered was more than mismanagement. It was theft, exploitation, and dangerous misrepresentation of our name. The agent flipped to the next document. Proof of payments made by Tony to known criminals, leases on properties flagged for laundering investigations, backdoor meetings with persons of federal interest. This is extensive, she said. More than banking violations. Roman nodded. That's why I'm here. Before this expands, I want to cooperate. Williams studied him for a moment. You understand, she said carefully, that once you talk to the federal government, it's not just Tony they'll look at. It's everything. I do, Roman replied. Which is why I'm making sure you look at the right things. The real threats. I didn't build this empire, but I'll be damned if I let parasites destroy it. They spoke for another hour. Williams asked about Tony's allies, Ava's role, who had access to what systems, who authorized specific transactions. Roman answered it all without hesitation. At the end of the meeting, he handed her one final folder. This, he said, documents Tony's use of company funds to rent properties linked to laundering, pay individuals already under surveillance, and create operational cells without oversight. Williams flipped through the pages. Her expression didn't change, but her tone did. We'll need to verify all of this. And you will, Roman said. Everything in those folders checks out. And if you need more, I'll get it to you. As she rose, she nodded once, businesslike, but with a hint of respect. "You're either the most prepared heir I've ever met, or the most dangerous one." Roman gave a thin smile. "I learned from the best." When the door shut behind her, Roman didn't relax. He went to the window, looking out at the city below. For the first time in weeks, he saw more than tension, more than war. He saw clarity. Tony's aggression had brought heat on them all. Ava's betrayal had tested every ounce of his restraint. The empire Vincent built had stood at the edge of collapse. But now? Now it was recalibrating, realigning, healing with him at the helm. The pieces were in motion. Tony was under formal federal investigation. Ava was legally and financially paralyzed. And Roman had built a wall of evidence so solid, even Santos and the FBI would have no choice but to treat him not as a suspect, but as the man who saved everything. And yet, he wasn't done. Not until Tony was officially out. Not until the people who'd aided him were dismantled. Not until this wasn't just recovery, but a warning. Because Roman Castellano wasn't just surviving. He was rewriting the future. The moment Roman ended the call with David Chun, the atmosphere in his office changed. The war had escalated. This wasn't about influence, alliances, or control anymore. This was about survival. He stared out the window, watching as the city moved with its usual indifference, while in the shadows of Newark, his cousin was planning his execution. Tony's desperation had finally boiled over. He wasn't trying to win the game anymore. He was trying to burn the board. Roman turned from the glass and began making calls. His first was to Morrison. 3 men, Roman said flatly. Professional hitters from Brooklyn. David Chun says they've been hired to send a message. Morrison didn't ask how he knew. He never asked unnecessary questions. Then we escalate your protective detail. Full perimeter coverage. Licensed security with documented clearance. We ensure law enforcement has real-time access to their movement. If they so much as shadow your vehicle, it'll be on the record. Roman paced slowly, calm but coiled. They're coming tonight. Then tonight, Morrison replied. We make sure they leave behind the kind of evidence federal prosecutors love. By 3 p.m., Roman's residence, vehicle routes, and office were under discreet but comprehensive surveillance. A private team of licensed ex-law enforcement officers took control of his schedule. Vehicles were swapped, communications were monitored, and entrances were rerouted through coded channels. It was the kind of protection package usually reserved for politicians under credible threats. Because that's what this was now. Roman Castellano wasn't just a target. He was the last obstacle standing between Tony and a criminal empire. That evening, Detective Santos visited personally. Roman met her at the rear entrance of his building, one of only 3 still active. Her face was tight with pressure. We've got chatter, she said without preamble. Unmarked car scenes circling your building. Same make and model tied to Brooklyn suspects. Roman nodded. We expected that. What we didn't expect, she continued, lowering her voice, was Tony calling in a favor from a detective on suspension. Someone who still has access to badge credentials. That made Roman pause. They're trying to disguise it as law enforcement? Exactly. They think if they knock on your door with a fake badge, you'll lower your guard. Roman glanced at the camera feed on the wall display, showing every corner of the building, including the black car slowly passing the side alley. Then we don't lower it, he said. We tighten it. Santos gave a short nod. I've already got 2 real agents embedded with your team. If they make a move tonight, they won't walk out of here. At 11:13 p.m., the trap was sprung. 3 men approached the loading dock of Roman's office building, dressed as plainclothes agents, moving with fake confidence. What they didn't know was that Santos was watching from the adjacent rooftop. Morrison's team had cameras tracking every movement, and 2 FBI observers were listening through pinned microphones on Roman's jacket. When the lead man lifted his badge to the rear guard, he didn't even get his first word out. Spotlights cut on. Rifles cocked. Drop it. The 3 froze. 1 flinched. Within seconds, they were on the ground, hands zip-tied, weapons confiscated, Miranda rights read by the actual authorities. Roman watched from a high-floor window as the final play unfolded exactly as he'd anticipated. It wasn't just a failed it. It was a recorded, coordinated, federally observed attempt at murder for hire, led directly back to Tony Marchetti. Game over. Back inside, Santos looked at Roman. You baited him perfectly. No, Roman replied. He baited himself. I just let him follow his nature. She studied him. You're not what I expected when this started. Roman half-smiled. Most people assumed I was just my father's puppet. Now they're learning I was a student. By morning, Tony was in federal custody. Arrested at a construction front in Long Island, trying to bribe a local inspector into lying about surveillance footage. Ava had already boarded a flight to Switzerland under her maiden name, but an Interpol hold flagged the passport. She was detained in Zurich by 9:30 a.m. And Roman? Roman was in Vincent's office. The real office. Not the one with glass walls and leather chairs, but the hidden room behind the bookshelf, lined with red folders, maps, and codes. He picked up a photo of his father, standing beside Morrison, Santos, and Judge Blackwell, long before Roman had understood the gravity of those relationships. Now, those very relationships were what saved him. And more importantly, what would protect everything his father built. The final phase had ended not with a shootout, but with silence. Legal silence. Recorded calls. Wire transfers. Intercepted messages. Tony's empire collapsed under the weight of his own arrogance, greed, and blind ambition. Ava would face trial for conspiracy and fraud. Her silence now negotiated in exchange for testimony against Tony's enforcers. Roman stood at the top of Vincent Castellano's empire, not by inheritance, but by earning it, piece by piece, cut by cut. He had endured betrayal, dodged assassination, deflected legal destruction, and turned every one of his enemies' moves into weapons against them, not because he was ruthless, but because he understood what his father always said. Power isn't in what you control. It's in what people fear losing if they cross you. And now, no one would cross Roman Castellano again. Roman adjusted his cufflinks as the conference room settled into silence. The air was thick with attention. These weren't just employees. They were witnesses to a rebirth. The Castellano Empire had been gutted, dissected, and rebuilt. From the ashes of betrayal came a new structure, tighter, leaner, and lethal to any future disloyalty. Every person sitting before him had passed Morrison's personal vetting, survived background scrutiny, and agreed to loyalty clauses with teeth. The message was clear. This wasn't just a job. This was an oath. Roman stepped forward, his voice measured and sharp. What we've built here isn't just a company. It's a standard. And moving forward, the only people welcome inside these walls are the ones who understand what it costs to get here. He scanned the room. No one spoke. You've been brought on not just for your skills, but because you know where loyalty ends and self-interest begins. The men and women who forgot that distinction, they no longer have a seat. Every eye held steady on him. They understood. And that's exactly what Roman needed. Understanding, not obedience. By the end of that week, Castellano Industries had finalized contracts with 3 new municipal partners. Federal agencies that had once circled like vultures were now extending cooperation instead of suspicion. Detective Santos visited the office for a quiet meeting over espresso. You've done more to clean up this city's undercurrent than 3 task forces combined, she said. You might not wear a badge, but you've kept a lot of good people from going under. Roman gave a dry smile. I didn't clean it up. I just made it too expensive to stay dirty. She chuckled. That's one way to enforce stability. The final nail in Tony's coffin came 4 weeks later. His trial ended in a full conviction on all charges: racketeering, conspiracy to commit murder, financial fraud, and multiple counts of obstruction. Life without parole. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Ava's plea deal followed quietly. Her cooperation helped dismantle Tony's criminal web, but the judge still handed her a federal sentence: 6 years at a minimum security facility in upstate New York. Roman didn't attend either sentencing. He didn't need to. Victory wasn't measured in handcuffs or courtroom verdicts. Victory was silence. And silence now followed his name like a shadow. respected, feared, and unchallenged. One rainy evening, Morrison joined Roman on the balcony outside his office, a glass of single malt in hand. "You know," Morrison began, watching the city lights shimmer through the mist, "Vincent once told me he wasn't sure you had the edge to run this empire. Said you had your mother's heart." Roman raised his glass. He wasn't wrong. Morrison smirked. "Well, you've proven you inherited both their strengths. Her heart, his instincts." Roman didn't respond immediately. Instead, he let the sound of distant thunder answer for him. After a moment, he finally said, "He taught me the rules. But grief taught me how to break them." Late that night, alone in the study Vincent once occupied, Roman sat at the old oak desk surrounded by red folders, handwritten notes, and maps inked with legacy. The empire was stable now. Clean. Controlled. But beneath the surface, he knew, there would always be pressure. Always some whisper of revolt, some hungry hand reaching for more than it earned. He took out a worn photograph. Vincent, younger, proud, unbreakable. Roman placed the photo back in its frame. "You were right, old man," he murmured. "They mistook my silence for weakness. You trained me too well." He stood, turned off the lamp, and walked out, knowing that tonight, for the first time in a long time, there were no enemies left to face. Only the weight of legacy, and the satisfaction of having earned it. Roman stood in silence, his gaze locked on the Manhattan skyline, glowing beneath the evening sun. Behind him, the conference room emptied. One by one, his new leadership team filed out, their expressions a mixture of respect and unspoken understanding. What stood here now wasn't just a business. It was a fortified legacy. The Castellano Empire had been tested by betrayal, dismantled from within by those who once smiled in the family's name. But through blood, strategy, and fire, Roman had rebuilt it, smarter, leaner, stronger. Every lie had been countered with proof. Every threat had been met with precision. And every betrayal had been answered with a consequence too final to ignore. His phone buzzed once. A message. "Roman, I made terrible mistakes. Is there any possibility of forgiveness, reconciliation?" He didn't hesitate. No. One word. Final. Complete. He blocked the number. He didn't need closure. He'd already written it into history. Ava could live with her gallery, her exile, and the weight of her decisions. Frank, Sandra, Chin, they'd rot behind bars or fade into irrelevance, their names etched into the archives of what not to do. And Tony? He would die in a box, forgotten and alone, buried by the very power he thought he could steal. Roman took one last look at the city below. Every light, every window, every shadow carried a lesson Vincent had once drilled into him. You don't own the empire until you've defended it with everything you have. Now he had, and everyone who mattered knew it. There would be no second coups, no silent rebellions, no whispered doubts in dark corners, because the empire had been claimed not with words, but with war. Thank you for joining us for this unforgettable story. What would you have done in Roman's place? Tell us in the comments, we read them all. If this tale of betrayal, justice, and legacy gripped you, help support our work. Like this video, subscribe to our channel and hit the bell so you never miss a moment. We're building something powerful here, and we'd love to have you with us. Check out the next story on your screen. Trust us, it's just as cold.